all Canadian families, we are on the Titanic. The iceberg hasn't hit yet, so we're not sinking. If we don't shift course, that iceberg is coming for us.
I'm not planning on leaving. I'm fighting. We want to make this country incredibly great.
We begin to see that it really isn't about diversity. It is about punishing the people who perform beyond the mean.
For people who don't care, where do you see Canada going?
Oh, it's catastrophic. It is that bad.
What is the carbon tax doing to lower carbon emissions?
Exactly.
I love this country. I was born in this country. I believe in what this country stands for. I believe in its people. I believe as a place opportunity for all to come and live, but the path that we're on is not working. And we are not going to be what we're supposed to be if we continue along this path.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome to Citizen. Glad you guys joined us.
Welcome.
Jeremy, how are you?
Very good, very cold, but good. I got 2 sweaters on. We're going to get through this.
Yeah, we're going to get through it. It's all good. I hope you guys have been well, wherever you guys are at in Canada or outside of Canada. Again, thanks for all your support and hanging out with us. We got a new friend of the show today. His name's Mr. Kirk Lubimov. Kirk, welcome. How are you, man?
Good. How are you guys?
Welcome. Very good.
We're doing good. We're doing good. We like it when we get smart people on the show that can tell us what's up. So, anyways, guys, we're going to be going into a lot today. We want to talk about Canada, kind of the economic outlook. There's been some progress with the potential tariffs. I want to do a little bit of a dive, Kirk, as we go through it. You did an awesome article on your Substack regarding a little bit the history of tariffs.
You read it?
I read it. I did actually. I actually highlighted it and saved it because when I saw it on X, on Twitter. When I saw it on Twitter, I wanted to come back to it. So I did come back to it. So interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about maybe Mr. Mark Carney. What else, Jerry, we want to get to?
There's an airplane that flipped in Toronto, Delta. That was ridiculous. I was watching somebody who was on the plane being interviewed 6 hours after getting off the plane. And,
imagine you're on that plane and you get off. I saw a guy's point of view. I'm not sure you saw the video.
He's walking
and he's out of his mind with his filming, he's watching. He's like, I was on that plane. The plane's upside down and flames coming out the engine. That's a crazy thing.
So he described the landing. And so there's actual video right now of the landing. And you can maybe, Paul, put it in the bottom of the screen here or something. But it came in pretty hot. I'm not an expert of landing, but it came in pretty hot. And the guy described the landing as it hit so extremely hard. And then all of a sudden, the next thing they know is they're hanging upside down.
Did they just break the landing gears?
It looks like that's what happened. It looks like it hit hard and then broke. And then it just flipped because there's a side wind, I guess. And then it flipped and rolled and then slid and just caught on fire. Gotcha. And the guy said that in a moment, there was no time to even scream, he said. They were just hanging upside down like bats, he said, from their seats.
So does that make you want to cancel your future flights?
Not at all. No, it doesn't.
Not for me either.
No.
I'm still going to Florida next month, so I'm going to go enjoy.
That's crazy, right?
So, Kirk, just a little bit about yourself. Maybe let our audience know who you are, what you do. Actually, before you do that, I'm going to vouch for you because I've been following you on X for a while. I've really appreciated your comments and your thoughts when it comes to the politics in Canada. I should say, not the politics, the issues in Canada. I know that you're in finance, you're in tech, kind of at the intersection of both of those worlds. So you really get to connect and meet probably a lot of interesting people, up-and-coming companies. You've also had some work you've done in advisor roles when it comes to political parties, et cetera. So anyways, maybe tell us a little bit about you, just so our audience gets to know why they're listening to you today.
Well, you guys brought me in.
That's why.
I came in for a coffee. No.
Yeah, exactly.
So as you said, I work in the intersection of essentially economics, finance, and policy with outlook on tech. The emphasis is the tech industry and how the evolution aspect looks like for society, for policy, how policy impacts it, and where to invest capital and how that looks like more into longer term than short term.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. You guys should follow Kirk on X. If you're on X, go follow. Information's on the screen. Check out his thing. First question. We're going to start with a positive question. What makes you optimistic about Canada?
Oh, I just think the opportunities we have here for a better life. From economic perspective, we have everything in this country we can ever ask for from a resources point of view, right? We just have to rethink how that works for us and actually get it to work for us, right? We can be taxed less. We can have way better, services as a country. our population size, I think, is an advantage compared to the economic opportunity that we have in this country.
Interesting.
So
The ability, you mean by the ability to like pivot and change and
change how we provide for people, right? And just the amount of productivity we can generate from what we have, including in resources for our people, like our, from tax generation and all that stuff is just so opportune to give us like such an incredible life that, I just really hope someone is brave enough to jump on it and take us there.
Interesting, man.
something I always do is if I'm looking at a problem or situation, I have this theory called wave a wand. If you could wave a wand, what would you do? And what I mean by that is like magic. Like if you just could figure out whatever it is you could do and you just could do it, what would you do? I would love to ask you that question. Is if you could wave a wand and you had the power to do something, to change something in Canada, what would you do?
Yeah, it's it's a lot of little things, right? So what happened the last really 5-10 years is we moved towards public sector driven economy, right?
Yeah.
We've generated ratio-wise most of our jobs within that are dependent on public sector output, right?
Mm-hmm.
So printing money, recruiting in that industry, and we moved away from generating private sector growth. So we need to change that, right? Because whenever, we, in the last 10 years, even in Canada, we haven't hired enough private sector people to pay for the public sector growth that we had, right? So that means just naturally we're going to have deficits for a long time, right? So we need to change that equation, right? We became dependent on real estate, which is essentially 20% of our economy, rather than developing things that are better for us, right? So essentially we start depending a lot of our future on credit, right? Real estate is credit, public sector is credit, right? So we need to start getting innovation and productivity out of our private sector to pay for essentially our future, right?
When you say, when you say real estate's credit, just so people understand, because real estate isn't producing new wealth.
No.
You're taking out a value that's increased, and you're withdrawing money based on that value. So that's why it's credit. It's not actual wealth production for countries.
Exactly, right? And it's not producing anything again, right? It's just, you're just hoping that someone else is willing to pay something.
Sees the value.
Exactly. And then a bank will lend you money against it, right? So it doesn't really grow the pie the same way, if that makes sense. Yeah. So we need to return back to getting the private sector innovation, shrink the public sector so we can be sustainable, because we actually have a lot of good things in our, the thing is Canada went so far to one side. If we just correct a few things coming back, that we can have a whole different trajectory for our future, which could be so fruitful for Canadians. So I'm quite excited about that.
That's one of the clearest ways that I've actually heard it. It's quite refreshing.
Well, that's why you're a friend of the show now, officially, because we are optimistic about Canada. We love Canada as well. We think it's just a matter of getting those, as you said, those little changes back. And you said something interesting there. We've gone so far to one side. And we don't think the solution is now we have to go to the complete opposite side, right? It's about coming back to that center ground of being reasonable, right? There's a healthy mix that we can have, which the prosperity for Canada can absolutely rise when you find that equilibrium.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome to start there. I had a really good question. I just dropped it, man.
I just want to find out, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to remain Canada or become a 51st state? What do you think?
We're going to remain Canada.
Yeah?
Yeah. I don't know if we're going to remain Canada as Canada, if we don't break apart. But yeah.
What do you think the chances are of Canada becoming multiple countries? You got a rise in Quebec again. That's obviously never left the sentiment of wanting to become their own, but you're seeing a party now that's actually gaining more traction. That the Separatist Party, and that's becoming popularized again. Obviously,
could Quebec even support itself?
Ask the
What are your
man.
thoughts on that?
Well, they have huge amounts of debt. Right? They have big taxes, a lot of red tape. So even with that, they still have a lot of issues financially, right? So that's why they get $13 billion in equalization essentially, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense for Quebec to be their own country. They have their own culture that they really want to protect, right? You can't blame them, right? I'm all for it. And I think them being their own country will help them strengthen and realize, okay, we need to actually develop stuff here, rather
Backs
than
against the wall, we got to do something.
Yeah. So it'll be good. So they could be even perhaps a better partner to the rest of Canada in the future. But it's, if they want it, this is a really strong opportunity for Canada to say, okay, vote yourself out if you can. Let's just give it to them, right? And if they say no, if they vote against it, then we need to start talking about a different relationship where you give back as well, not just expect the whole country to revolve around you, right? You had your chance, you either take it or you blew it, and you start becoming a partner to Canada.
Yeah, I remembered my question. You grew up in Russia. You said Siberia. You've spent time in the Middle East, in Europe, and you've been in Canada for a couple decades now.
Yeah.
A question I've been kicking myself, and it has to do with loyalty to country, is this idea of Canada becoming a 51st state. We've been playing around with that idea. We're Canadian at heart. I do think a lot of Canadians don't know what it means to be Canadian.
Yeah, I agree.
Whereas other countries that patriotic stance is stronger, and there's different degrees of that. So you have lived and been a part of multiple countries and cultures. At what point for you does loyalty to country succumb to the economics of actually living a good life? So that you tracking where I'm going? Because for me, it's like I want to remain as Canada, but I've been trying to, and I'm not for becoming a 51st state. I think I'm like you. We're like you. Canada's got the opportunity, but I started playing my mind. Okay, let's play the movie out. If Canada gets to what point, then at what point do I start advocating? Okay, my family doesn't have a future.
Before you answer that question, though, like what does it mean to be Canadian? You know what I mean? Like, this is the thing. Like, I do love this country. I love the people. I love generally we seem to have a really big heart, and that seems to be noticed around the world. Typically, people say they put on Canadian flags when they travel because they get treated better, because it has a better rep worldwide for how we are as people. But I don't know. What else does it mean? You know what I mean? When you're, but I'm serious though, like actually exploring. If you were to put anyone on the spot right now, I don't know if they would be able to articulate much.
Okay, well,
more.
if you asked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on CNN, he would say, well, it means, we're not American.
Yeah.
That's how he defined it.
That's a horrible way to
It's
define anything.
awful, yeah. And that's our Prime Minister saying that.
Yeah. That's a horrible way to define anything.
If I was to ask you, what does it mean to be American? People could probably define it by liberty, by freedom, right? The history is tied of separating in 1770s away from British rule and becoming our own, forging our own path. They have that whole, there's different parts of that.
And Americans probably can define it right down to, I'm from Boston, I'm from the Bronx, I'm from, all those things, right? Where in Canada, we don't do that. We don't really have that, I'm from Surrey. It's like, man,
yeah, exactly.
What are you picking on Surrey for, man?
Well,
Totally.
I'm from Brampton. Yeah.
Like even like for example, we're both from Winnipeg. One of the biggest things we say from Winnipeg is that we're used to the cold, and so Canadians are like, we identify with the cold more than we do loyalty to a flag. You know what I mean? Canada's known for that more than anything else that I hear. And so that's what I mean is I'm not saying in spite of this, then let's just become American. Not at all. I'm just saying, when I went down to Montana, we went down there to a camp that we went to. I was driving around there and I just saw flags everywhere, and I saw loyalty, and I saw people who were proud to be American. And I went home and I was like, I want to put a Canada flag somewhere. Like I felt that urge being like, I want to be proud of it. I saw their patriotism everywhere, and I was like, why do we not have any of that here? I just was kind of annoyed with what seems to be like a bit of a softness to a great country. It annoyed me.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, there's this, I quote Conrad Black a lot with this, familiar with Conrad Black? He uses one statement that we get the government that we deserve. So, and he has a book.
Government is a reflection of the people.
Exactly. Right? And he wrote a book, which actually maybe I should read.
Yeah, we should.
A couple years ago I read it. We should read it again. It's called the Canadian Manifesto. And I think he dives pretty heavily. No, I read it. He dives heavily into the history of Canada and our story. And there is amazing stories of what made Canada and the history of us back into the 1600s. And you have the connections of U.S. becoming and Canada actually rejecting. Like if you remember in the 1770s, you had the founding fathers of America invite Canada to become a part of what they're building. And Canada rejected that. And for whatever reasons, it's a really interesting history. I think we have done a very poor job at
communicating,
defining, and asking people what does it mean to be Canadian.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it, because for my children, for example, we're all dads. When I have an opportunity to speak the culture of my home to my children, I do it. I communicate it. If my son acts outside of that culture, I go, Ellis, that's not who you are. We're not the type of people who treat anyone that way. What are you doing? We treat with love, respect. Come on. And I correct it and I communicate it, and he knows. So that if someone says, what's your family culture like? He'll be like, we treat people with love and respect, and he'll verbalize it. That's exactly as you're saying. Even going through school, growing up in this country, I do love this country. I love it. I have nothing to verbalize. I have no history to communicate. I have nothing to share. And we've lived here our whole lives, and it doesn't come off my tongue, which is, it's a failure of country and education, I feel like.
Yeah, there's, if you look at, you brought up where I lived before, Canada doesn't have a national song, right? There's no folk music here, talking about the spirit of the people, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There is no national dress. There is no essentially national holidays except that mean something historically, except
to Canada.
A few things. So whereas all the other countries outside North America have those, right? So the deep cultural current connection is there for history, right?
Yeah.
To history, where we don't have that here. So I think that is such a differentiating aspect of what we have here in our society compared to other countries that have a lot of that.
I went to, we were in Florida once for Independence Day, July 4th. And we were staying, we rented a cabin on the beach. It was beautiful. It's beautiful. And I was in shock for how many people had fireworks. I'd never been in the States for Independence Day. And it didn't matter where you looked. There, at once it got to like 10:30, 11 o'clock, the sun was down, fireworks everywhere. All the beach, the entire beach, all the way down. I'm like, who are these people? I was like, everybody was celebrating their country on Independence Day. Whereas Canada, it's like, you want to go to find a carnival? Fireworks? I don't really care. No, like there's just not that.
And they keep trying to find excuses why not to
cancel
celebrate. Yeah, which is it makes no sense, right? And then they talk about national identity, right?
Yeah.
It's but I just want to touch on something you brought up there in your original question. What will, if you get there, like, how bad these things have to be before,
Yes. Yep.
But why does it have to get there?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question is, and it comes back to national pride, is like, why do Canadians let it even get to that point? Right? How do we tackle that problem within our culture that we don't just let politicians in our country fail? Right? Why don't people rise up? Right?
Yeah, I think I have an answer for that. Are you familiar with Gad Saad?
Yeah.
He had him on a while ago. He has a book, The Parasitic Mind. And I do think that a lot of Canadians have this mind virus that's defined by comfort. Yeah, and I think that, and we had Martin Peltier. Do you know him? He's a Calgary guy. He's a chief investment officer for Wellington Altus.
Oh, yeah.
And smart dude. And we asked him, what advice would you give yourself or your kids in this day and age? And he said, take risk.
Yeah.
Like free market, put yourself out there, take the risk and try to innovate. Like, don't be afraid. It's helpful if you have something you can fall back on. But I think a lot of Canadians, and you're talking about the bureaucracy, our leading growth sector in terms of jobs has been the government in Canada. And I think we become dependent on the fact that we'll just be okay because you get the money, and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder if I think that's the answer as to why Canadians might let it get there, because we've just essentially, I think a lot of us have become passive in the sense of, I'm just going to someone else will do it, or I'm comfortable with where I'm at, or someone hand me.
So let me ask you a follow-up on that.
Yeah.
Do you think those type of Canadians will elect someone that will push for the opposite?
No.
So how do we change things?
Well, what we're doing right now. Well, at least Jared and I asked that question lots.
Yeah.
What can we do? Like, and I hate the tip. This is important, but I hate the typical answer of just go vote. Because my wife's been pushing back. She's like, well, what do I do when I can't vote? Like, it's 5 years between voting, or 3 years, or whatever. I'm like, that's a great question, but it comes down to, I think, the dinner table conversation. How do you shift the conversation en masse, where you have Canadians now weighing good ideas and bad ideas, and a lot of things like tribalism's become a part of it. People just defend blindly. People love reading headlines and don't like you can tell when you write, you go deep on issues and you have understanding. I don't know. I just think there's a passivity that's encroached on a lot of people. Like, we're all in our mid to late 30s, right? That's something that, like, I was raised. I can't stand that type of stuff. It's like, no, we got to progress forward. What's the new frontier? How do we reject this kind of stuff? And if we can get that attitude back, well, I think watch out, world, if we can.
Yeah. It probably has to change through our education system, right? How we bring up kids, right? Because they spend
100%.
8 hours a day in that environment, right? Sometimes
100%.
more with in the environment than they do at home with parenting. So I think that whole trajectory need to be moved over in our education system to begin with.
Well, and back to the, like, so 34 years ago, I think if I did the math, you fled communism with your family. And so what was it like, you, like, in the conversation you've had maybe with your parents and stuff, in their perspective on living in communism? That's obviously, in our opinion, or in mine at least, those are horrible ideas that were drawn out and lived in for very, very long periods of time. And so it can get that bad. And so what's your perspective on viewing it from their angle now of being liberated from it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because liberated is
maybe it's the wrong word.
It's a good word, but it has a big definition, right?
Yeah.
So what my grandma on one side stayed there, and one of her last messages to me before she passed away, she left me a message on WhatsApp, is saying how she's glad to see that our family has left that environment, that now you can, have to worry about what the government will put you through, or and how free you can be to choose your own future, essentially, right? And now, but we're moving towards, especially we saw during COVID and all this, we're almost moving back towards government control, especially here in Canada, right? A lot more emphasis on government involvement in our day-to-day life. Yeah. So it's so the question is, how much liberty you have at what, right? In general, right? For example, if we don't have an economic opportunity at a certain industry because of government policy, is it really liberty, or are you getting pushed towards one side as a byproduct of that, right? So the question of liberty is, do you have really true liberty at picking anything and trying to succeed in it, or you have a liberty at picking what
they say you're allowed to pick?
The current policy encourages, right?
Yeah.
So so the invisible government hand is always visible, right? It's just, how do we perceive true liberty?
And that's the thing. When we had the privilege of sitting down and talking with Conrad Black, and that was one of the things I walked away with, was he's a historian, and he's constantly looking through the lens of history. And so after leaving the dinner with him, I just went, I want to pick up a history book and read it, because it just is overflowing out of him about lessons learned from the past. And that's something I think, especially when you talk with anyone, actually anyone that I think that's in their 20s and lower has no concept of any history, any detail, or the repercussions to those types of decisions.
I am optimistic, though. I do think that the pendulum is starting to swing in that. Like, I think it's at the early stages, because you asked, or we were just mentioning earlier about what's it going to take. I do feel like there is a little bit of a shift. I'm not sure if that's a Trump effect, or that's just people are hitting their breaking point because their wallets are being affected.
Yeah.
But anyways, you are so kind with us to give us time. I know you got to roll right away. I want to ask you a quick question as you leave. What Okay, so we're going to slightly change direction. When it comes to the outlook of Canada, we talked about, Jeremy said, if you could wave a wand, is it enough to have a new government in? Or do you think we, as a Canadian people, our mindset has to shift?
Well, I think the new government is going to have to change people's minds, to shift their minds. The next government has to do, you mentioned before, but governments has essentially 4 years to do huge changes.
Yeah.
Which is, or some changes, or at least you hope they'll do huge changes.
Yeah.
Right. So the problem is with the way it's been going, to the government infrastructure underneath, the new government or the next government does not change. Right. So essentially we have the same bureaucrats working for decades, doing the exact same thing in governments. Right.
Yeah.
So the whole infrastructure government doesn't change. It's just the top policies that do. Right. So the next government's job is to really swing the pendulum to the other side. Right. What Trump is doing is essentially it's his last term, right?
Yep.
So he has 4 years to do massive, drastic changes to the country, and we're essentially in the same boat, right?
Yep.
Yeah. We are running $62 billion deficits. Our interest costs is going to be almost $100 billion, which are more than our health transfer costs or anything else, right? So we're going down a financial path that it's really hard to climb out of, right? And for Canadians, why would you want to be wasting that money on paying bankers for bonds rather than having that money for your own services?
Totally.
Right? Everyone wants better services, and yet you're not willing to do anything different to get them.
Exactly.
Right?
It's the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. So the next government has to really act and not act like a politician. Right? They can't act like a typical government. They really have to take the hammer to the government because they have to essentially restructure our whole economy. Right? We need to turn from being credit and public sector driven and swing the pendulum to the other side, and that aspect of getting the private sector to be confident again, generate confidence in our sector and private sectors, and try to rebuild it, right? Because essentially our future is going to be dependent on that.
And not care about being popular.
And not care about popular, right? Because
Totally.
the thing is, one of the things that the next government has to do, it has to do it fast, because you're going to have pain coming through an economic cycle, right?
100%.
So
It's short term for long term.
exactly. So they need to see that through, so they can, if they want to get reelected again, so people can see the success on the other side of it, so they can get reelected as well. Because the issue is for Canada, for the next government, is not just have 4 years, but have another 4 years to try to change things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With my last question, last one. It seems like there's a resurgence in the Liberal Party with which I think is an eventuality of Carney taking on the leadership. Is that enough to sway voters in Mr. Jagmeet Singh to support, to have a minority, or do you think Conservatives are still looks like a shoo-in, if there is an election even called?
Yeah, it'll be called at some point. But for Jagmeet, I'll start with him. He's done such a things trying to cash in secure his pension rather than call an election when his party was hot.
Yeah.
He was riding hot in the second half of last year, right? So he should have grabbed it, and he didn't for his pension, right? Now the problem is with the new leader, Mark Carney, his party are going to lose votes to the Liberal Party, right? Because there's not a lot of point voting NDP, right?
Oh.
So unless you're really crazy, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And Carney is trying to move. I think Carney is going to give the Conservatives a lot of trouble. Carney is going to try to move the party towards the center. He has no choice.
Yeah.
And he already said that, right?
Well, he's not stupid.
He's not stupid, right? He's ideologically driven.
Yep.
That doesn't mean he's stupid.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to just come to terms with that, right? I don't really care what shoes he wears. I don't really care that he's successful. We should celebrate that as Conservatives, right? That's part of our thing. It's not a bad thing. It's the ideas that he's going for. And we know he's going to try to bring the party towards the center. He mentioned it many times.
Yep.
He's going to try to be more financially balanced. He mentioned that. He keeps saying that he's going to cut middle class taxes.
Yep.
He's going to try to build infrastructure, right? However that looks like to him, right? And he probably might throw money at it. It seems like he's okay with going to deficit a little bit more to generate that, which I think the conservatives should as well, actually. We just need to invest it in the right stuff and cut the government lower.
Yeah.
So we can have that bandwidth in potential savings. So I think he's going to put a really strong ideas forward that will give conservatives a lot of trouble. I just think the conservatives need to beat him to the punch in being a leader in ideas. Because right now they're essentially playing off the back foot, trying not to upset anyone, right? And, afraid that CBC is going to write something hurtful for them, which they should move on past that and start being the champion of ideas and hope for the country, right? Trump won, not because he gave two hoots of what CNN wrote. He won because he gave so much hope to people.
Totally.
Right? He gave people a hope to own a home, get a job, get a better paying job.
Exactly.
Right? We don't do that in Canada. Right? So the conservatives need to start championing that message of, you're gonna have a better future here.
He was like a William Wallace figure, giving hope to in the face of opposition.
Yeah.
But anything else, Jer?
No, I think that's such a powerful point to end on. Giving hope to an optimistic future. That's
Right on.
exactly what we need in this nation.
Thank you, sir, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys all for hanging out with us. You know what to do with all the social media stuff. Everyone asks you to like it, but don't stop liking other people's channels, just like our channel. And unsubscribe from everyone. Just subscribe to us. We'll see you guys next time.
Show goes on.